Welcome to Inspired Living with Marc and Kim. Every Wednesday, Marc and Kim, along with their special guests, will explore thought-provoking topics and ideas that promote creativity, self-help, healing, happiness, and well-being to inspire you on your spiritual journey. Each week, Marc and Kim will discuss different paths to achieving a more spiritual, balanced, happy, and healthy lifestyle. Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience, and all things spiritual. Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. Marc and Kim are tested, certified, and professional spiritual mediums, metaphysical teachers, healers, and spiritual advisors with their own individual spiritual practices in Seattle, Washington, and Los Angeles, California. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in this beautiful planet of ours. This is Inspired Living with Marc and Kim here on the OMTimes Radio Network. Just want to say happy Wisdom Wednesday to you. You are the inspired and the inspiration. Thanks so much for tuning in to the live broadcast today, where we're live every Wisdom Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. I am your host today, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, coming to you with part 2 of The Awakened Man. And we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about what I talked about in part 1, picking up right where we left off about the awakened man, the process of the awakened man, what the awakened man looks like. It's not always an easy process. And this isn't just an episode for the men out there, the men listeners and our inspired listeners. This also is for the women listeners out there. But the focus is going to be on the awakened man. And I want to start off today's show with a quote from Daniel Nielsen. And it talks about there is a shift taking place. The awakened man is taking off his armor, exposing his heart, and connecting to his feelings. And growing up, we weren't always taught to connect to our feelings. And part of the awakened man is that process of awakening, connecting to yourself, connecting to your emotions, connecting to the world around you. And I just want to, say thank you again for tuning in to all of our inspired listeners all around the globe. If you want to call in during the second half of the show, if you've got something that's on your heart, something that's on your mind, you have a question about awakening, the spiritual journey, the awakening process, or you've had a shakening that's caused an awakening, give us a call at 1-202-570-7057, and I'll be taking callers in the second half of the show. If you want to interact with us, you can reach us a few different ways through our social media platforms. If you go to Facebook and type in Inspired Living Radio, the closed community page will come up. You'll have to ask to join that global community of over 1,000 inspired listeners, and we'd love to have you post your questions there, share your inspirational stories, and really just get connected in a way that brings people together, that inspires people, gives people hope, and brings people into community without dividing. If you want to follow us on Twitter or Instagram, you can follow us under the handle Inspired for Us. That is the number 4. And if you want to work directly with myself, you can go to marclainhart.com. You can internet search the Intuitive Prospector. You can now find me through the Alexa or Echo application as well. If you have an Alexa at home, just ask Alexa to open up Positive Living, and you'll actually get some daily spiritual tips from myself. And again, the best place, one-stop shop for me, is marclainhart.com. My co-host today, Kim Falcon, founder of Love First, is currently on the West Coast. She's made the move back from Richmond, Virginia, and she'll be joining us next week for a fascinating topic on PTSD and our veterans. So she's been traveling from Richmond to Encino, California, and getting all settled back on the West Coast. So we just want to give a shout out to Kim and look forward to having her back on the show next week. If you want to work with Kim directly now in California, I guess it's no longer a bi-coastal practice for Kim. It used to be Encino and Richmond, Virginia, but now it's just Encino, California. You can find her at lovefirst.info. If you do miss the live broadcast today, don't sweat. We've got you covered. We've got you on all of our podcasts, over 4 seasons of Inspired Living Radio, and you can find us through a couple different channels: YouTube, iTunes, Podbean, SoundCloud, marclainhart.com, lovefirst.info. You can also go to the OMTimes Radio Archives Network, and they've got all of our shows, but not just our shows. They've got a lot of great topics and a lot of great other shows with amazing hosts and amazing guests. So make sure to check out OMTimes Radio and OMTimes Radio Archives. And again, if you want to catch us every Wisdom Wednesday, we start live at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and this goes over to a podcast afterwards. You can also catch me every Monday morning for my live Facebook show and YouTube show, Metaphysical Mocha Mondays, where we have a lot of fun spiritually prospecting for your own spiritual gold, and soon to be broadcasting through my Instagram channel as well, which is Intuitive Prospector. So with that, thank you again for joining us today. And I just wanted to open up the show with another Daniel Nilsson quote talking about the awakened man, because today's topic is all about the awakening process, the awakened man. Going to give you some tips to help you with awakening, because like I said, it's not always an easy journey to go through that transformational process. The alchemy talks about the refiner's fire, going through that fire of transforming that gold and making yourself stronger. And a lot of times when I first started, I always thought, the spiritual path, unicorns and rainbows and kitty cats and cupcakes. Not at all. So we're going to be talking about that and giving you some tips to help you with that journey. And the quote from Daniel Nilsson is, "The awakened man knows who he is. He doesn't shift like the tide, but remains steadfastly loyal, treasuring the woman he loves." And that's just one of a few quotes that I'll be talking about today about the awakened man. And when I want to first start, in part one, I was giving you some tips and I was going to do an exercise, and we actually ran out of time. And so I thought this would be a good time before our very first break here in just a few minutes. I want to do an exercise with you and just kind of give you some food for thought and something to marinate and percolate over. And it's a study that was done at Harvard University in their history department. And the professor is Tal Ben-Shahar. And he is actually one of the world's leading positive psychologists and teacher at Harvard University in their history department. And he tells us what he tells us in this exercise is that we already have all the wisdom we need. So how do we get to that wisdom that we need? And I touched briefly last week on part one. So if you didn't catch part one, you'll want to go check that out on our podcast channels. And this is part two for today. And the exercise that I want to talk to you about is if your 110-year-old self could come back in time and have a conversation with you right now. And so in the class, Tal Ben-Shahar he points to individuals who've had near-death experiences. And this caught my eye because I did have a near-death experience. And that's kind of part of the path that opened up my journey into spiritualism, into mediumship, into metaphysics, into psychic, into parapsychology. And my near-death experience, my out-of-body experience, we refer to them as NDEs or OBEs, as well as a lot of trauma of losing my brothers, one to murder and one to brain cancer in the same week, that really transformed me and really got me questioning my own path. And what he talks about is when people have either a near-death experience or a life-threatening illness, maybe suddenly or permanently, and I can relate to that because this week I had my first bout with vertigo and dizzy spells, something I've never had to encounter before. So I guess this is part of my awakening process as we have the full moon that just passed as well with releasing. So as I'm talking today, I'm literally experiencing that firsthand myself. But what he says is that there's the change in our lives create meaning and happiness that maybe hadn't been there before that moment. And essentially, we have always known what to do, but we weren't actually doing it until life gave us a kick in the butt. Isn't that so true? And, Tal Ben-Shahar, just research him if you have a chance. He's brilliant, and this is a brilliant exercise, and I hope that this really helps you in part two of today's discussion. But tapping into your wisdom that's already percolating in your consciousness, because we pull things down from our consciousness. I like to remind people that everything that's happening is happening past, present, and future. All the information we need to know is happening all around us. But what are we doing to download that or upload that? We use that in technology today. Upload to the cloud, pull down from the cloud. What are you doing to connect to the consciousness of your wisdom? And it goes something like this. You're 110 years old, and NASA or Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Atlantic, or even Tesla, have created a time-traveling machine. And it can take you back to this moment right now where you're listening to my voice through this podcast or live broadcast. And your 110-year-old self just has 60 seconds to chat with your current you, where you're currently at. And what do you tell yourself? What are the most important truths, lessons, big ideas that you want to share in that 30 to 60-second window? What would you share? What's the most important message you'd want to share with yourself. So just take a second, maybe write down some thoughts. If your 110-year-old self appeared to your current version of who you are right now, this is what I'd tell myself. And that's the exercise for positive thinking, connecting to the wisdom that's already there. And again, if you want to research positive psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar, make sure to do that. He's a professor at Harvard University and helping us to tap into our wisdom. And I always like to say that education leads us to knowledge, knowledge leads us to wisdom, wisdom hopefully leads us to enlightenment. And that's the exercise that I didn't get to in part one, and we finished that up in part two. So as we get ready to go to our first break here, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about our ego. We're going to talk about the soul. I'm also going to recommend that you take a profile about yourself, because one of the best ways that I found about who I am in this world is taking a Myers-Briggs profile test. There's a couple different assessments you can take: the DISC assessment, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and through that I learned a lot that I was known as the inspirer, and it's a lot of the work that I do today. And so when we come back from our second break, we'll get into that, talking about what the inspirer looks like. We're going to be talking about the ego versus the soul, and then I'm going to get right down into giving you some tips for awakening and also some tips to raise your consciousness, because like I said, that consciousness is all around you. What are you doing to tap into that consciousness? So let's see here. We should be having our very first break here in just a second. All righty. And I'm going to give you one more quote before we go to our break, talking about today's pathway of the awakened man. And again, it's Daniel Nilsson. Check him out. He's got a lot about the awakened man, a great author, and really great inspirational quotes. An awakened man is a warrior of the heart. He calls to other conscious men to join the revolution, to lay down their ego, and with true masculine energy, demonstrate what it means to return to love. This is Inspired Living Radio with Marc and Kim. We'll be back here in 2 minutes.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Are you seeking answers to life questions? Would you like to connect to a departed loved one? Are you suffering from pain, stress, or anxiety? Kimberly Thalkin is a tested, certified, and professional psychic, spiritual medium, energy healer, hypnotherapist, and the founder of Love First, where life transformations happen. Love First services support, guide, and empower individuals by connecting them to their highest potential to live a healthier, joyful, and meaningful life that's filled with purpose. All services can be done by phone, Skype, or in person in Encino, California. Please visit lovefirst.info. That's LOVEFIRST.info for more information. Death Row Dogs Rescue is a 100% all-volunteer, no-kill rescue 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are run solely by volunteers who dedicate their time and resources for the past 30 years to rescuing homeless pets from the streets in Los Angeles and surrounding areas, and from city and county animal shelters who are on death row, often moments away from being euthanized. We provide housing, medical care, and training to these neglected, abused, and often severely injured animals. Donate now, save a life, and allow these beautiful dogs to experience a home life filled with love. All donations are greatly appreciated and are tax deductible. Please visit www.deathrowdogsrescue.com to see some of our amazing dogs who need homes. Do not breed or buy. Make adoption your first option.
And welcome back to Inspired Living Radio with Marc and Kim. I am your host today, riding solo, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector. My co-host, Kim Thalkin, is traveling to California, getting set up, so she'll be back with us. She's been off for a couple of weeks as she makes that move back to the West Coast. And we're going to be back together next week as we talk about PTSD with our veterans, and going to be having a subject matter expert talking about that. So you'll want to join us next Wisdom Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And again, if you want to get onto our social media platforms right now, I am monitoring our Facebook page. So if you have a question for me that you want to talk about the spiritual process, the awakened process, if you're a man or a woman that's going through that awakening, that shakening that's caused the awakening, you can give us a call at 202-570-7057. That is the OMTimes radio call-in line. And then again, post your question on our Facebook page, and I will do my best to try to bring it to air if I can. So with that, let's talk about the awakened man, and I've given you a couple quotes from Daniel Nielsen about the awakened process, and somebody that I started to learn a lot about in the awakened process when I was going through this journey myself. Another gentleman that comes to mind who has written some really great books, and I want to give a shout out because he had a lot to do with my journey of spiritualism, of awakening, if you will, is Jeff Brown. And he's written a couple books, one called Who is the Awakened Man? A Guide to Become a Conscious and Powerful Man. And who doesn't want to become conscious and powerful? Not necessarily powerful in the way of ego, but powerful in navigating the many roads of life, navigating maybe your health, navigating your financial status. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to become conscious and powerful in changing the world, powerful in changing yourself. So again, two gentlemen that's helped me in my journey, and I haven't done this alone. This isn't Mark's concept. This is just me sharing my personal story and testimonial and transformation with all of you today. Is Daniel Nielsen and also Jeff Brown, two authors and who I would say are inspirers. So before the break, we were talking about a couple things, and one was that I was recommending to take an assessment for yourself, because you don't really know who you are unless you can actually answer a couple questions openly and honestly in a private manner. It doesn't have to be out there for anybody. But there was about, I'm trying to think now, about 5-6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I had a director where I work in my day job that had required us to take a Myers-Briggs profile so we could learn not only about ourselves but our team members. And when you learn about yourself, it helps you, be a better team member and have successful goals and, work as a team. And mine came back as the Inspirer. So for those of you who know what I'm talking about, have taken the Myers-Briggs profile, or you've taken a DISC assessment, or there's a whole bunch, but I personally favor the Myers-Briggs just because they really get in depth with the amount of questions. About 120 questions, if I remember correctly. And I always suggest and recommend that you answer openly and honestly, because you can, skew your own assessment if you're not open and truth with yourself. And I came back known as an extrovert, intuition, feeling, and perceiving, also known as an ENFP. And what I found from this as an inspirer is that my primary mode of living is focused externally, and where I take things primary based on my intuition. And I've always been very intuitive. In fact, that's where I came up with the Intuitive Prospector. I've always been sensitive. I've always been an empath. But my second mode of living was internal, and that's something that I hadn't really introduced myself to. I'd always been for several years living my journey externally, focusing on the external world, focusing on what I could do for others, focusing on how I could be the best in whether it was going to college or joining the Coast Guard or being part of the fire department. There was always something I was trying to prove to others, and I was forgetting about myself. And when the shaking and trauma that I went through from losing my brothers to my out-of-body experience as a young man to my near-death experience as a young boy, those really started to foster a seed within me. And again, that seed is having your insides literally ripped out so you can plant your roots. But I always like to say, if you don't plant your roots, you're not going to get your fruits. So it's important to have roots to get the fruits, and give yourself time and patience to grow. Just as a seedling grows into a tree, what seeds are you planting for the future you want tomorrow? And for me, it really forced me to stop living my path externally and really move into examining first and acknowledging the internal process. This is in that internal process where I would deal with things according to how I felt, maybe trying to control things from an ego standpoint, trying to control the things around me in the external world. And it was like running into a brick wall and just banging my head on the wall, because every time I tried to control something in the external world, I realized I didn't have any power to do that. The only power I had was how I responded to my external world and the thoughts that I had going within my internal world. And once I realized by going internally, and I realized through teachings, my own personal mentors that have mentored me over the years, some workshops, some studies, taking my graduate studies in sports medicine and human performance on the power of meditation, I really started to learn that the only way out is in. And that the happiness that we all seek is not necessarily in the external world, it's in your internal world. I always think of Eckhart Tolle when he reminds us that we're, how did he put it? He says that the world is not here to make you happy. The world is here to make you conscious. And it's through those external stimuli that I started to become conscious, and I started to awaken. And you hear a lot of the terms today: awoke AF, that person's awoke, awakening. You've heard about the generations behind us, the millennials that are awake and conscious. And I really do think there's a lot of truth in that. So what I would recommend is, in order to take that first stepping stone for the awakening man, the awakening process, is to really just get an assessment and answer it openly, truthfully, and honestly, so you can get a window into who you are, because that's one of the best things that I had. I didn't know I was inspired for many years. And for those that are ENFPs, we tend to be warm, enthusiastic people, typically very bright and full of potential, so it was nice to read. That's always, nice to stroke the ego when you read that. But they also live in a world of possibilities, and I really started to recognize that, there is so many possibilities if you just take a leap of faith and you take a chance. And we can become very passionate and excited about things, and I found that to be very true. I found that my enthusiasm led me to the ability to motivate others, to inspire others, and, to see that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. And I also found that, talking the talk and walking the walk, but I found that I loved life. I was starting to see my gift as special, being a psychic, being a medium. There was a lot of labels that came with that I had to work through. And I really was starting to strive to make the most out of it. I found, too, that with my ENFP as an inspirer, that I don't do well with mundane things or task-oriented things that are repetitive over and over again. I've had a few jobs like that, and I think a few of you know exactly what I'm talking about, doing the same thing over and over again, and I didn't do well with that. And I found that being, understanding my Myers-Briggs profile was to become a spiritual entrepreneur, be my own boss. And that's what I've done. I run two companies. I run the Intuitive Prospector spiritual consulting practice here in Seattle, Washington. I also have my own first aid CPR company called CPR Services Northwest. And so becoming my own boss, now I do have a part-time day job as well, working for the federal government, but that's the job that pays the bills. That's the job that has the benefits. That's the job that has the retirement and the vacation. It's not the passion. What I do today in the radio show and my Facebook show and my YouTube shows and writing articles and connecting with clients all around the world, that's my passion. That's my inspiration. But I would have never got to this point, guys, if I would have never found the profile and answered it openly and honestly to put me here today. Those are seeds I planted 7 years ago that allows you to hear my voice today on Inspired Living Radio. So that's the starting point for the awakened man. That's the starting point to jumpstart your path. And let's talk a little bit about the ego versus the soul, and also what an awakened man looks like versus a wounded man, because I was coming from a place of being wounded. Everything that life had thrown at me, being kicked in the stomach, being kicked in the butt, thinking that the world was out to get me, and for those of you that are listening today, I know you've asked the question, why do bad things happen to good people? When my brother was murdered and I had to go through 5 murder trials and then watch my father-in-law pass away from MS slowly and my older brother to brain cancer, I really questioned God. I questioned life. I questioned, why does bad things happen to good people? We're a good family. We've done, our share of good things and bad things, but not to warrant, a brother being murdered and a an older brother being diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, all within the same week, within 3 days, from a Sunday to a Wednesday, and really just getting kicked in the gut. And so for several years before I started my awakened process, before I started my healing process, I was really the wounded man. And so for our listeners today, I want to give you some tips. I'm just going to read through a list of what the awakened man looks like and what the wounded man looks like, and I'll leave it up to you, both men and women listening to the show today. Which bucket do you fall into? So let's start with the wounded man. The wounded man thinks vulnerability is a weakness. Boy, did I learn that the hard way. I was not going to show my vulnerability. And through that process of holding everything in internally, I began to have health problems. I began to have severe depression. I began to have PTSD because I was not expressing. I was not getting counseling. I finally did seek a grieving counselor and somebody that could help me express and share my thoughts. But because I was raised to think that vulnerability was a weakness, I didn't want to expose my weakness. And then through that process, I started to have disease, but I call it dis-ease. Disease with myself as a human, as a physical being, as an emotional being, as a mental being, as a spiritual being. I started to find that the wounded man lives in his head, believing everything that I thought was going through my head. And for you listening to the show today, you do not have to believe all the thoughts that go racing through your head. And there's about 50 to 60,000 thoughts. The question you have to ask is, are you listening to the same thoughts over and over and over again? You'll find that much of society is listening to those same thoughts. It's like Groundhog's Day, with Bill Murray. If you ever seen the movie Groundhog's Day, it's literally like Groundhog's Day in your mind. You find that when you're the wounded man, you seek to control and dominate others. And I really did that. I came from a culture and environment of being in the Coast Guard, so paramilitary with both the fire department and the Coast Guard. It's all about ego. It's all about confidence. It's all about just being a lifesaver, being a first responder. And we'll be talking about this in next week's shows, PTSDs for not only our veterans but also our first responders. And I found that I was a wounded man because I was trying to control and dominate others, and it only caused conflict. It only caused debates and arguments. And you find as a wounded man that you repress your anger and your trauma. And boy, did I push my anger and trauma deep, deep down. And of course, I tried to justify my anger. And that's what the wounded man does. The wounded man tries to justify his anger, and he comes from a place of ego, not his soul. Now, for everything that I just said for that list, think about where your journey is, and do you fall into that bucket? And if you do, and you're going to come back to this bucket, you have this, what I call the spiritual struggle of the ego versus the soul, the awakened man versus the wounded man. But for me, it was like, I don't want to be there anymore, because not only was I unhappy, I was having health issues, I was having depression, I was angry, and I didn't want to be in that space anymore. And that's when my awakening process started. That's when the awakened man, my spiritual journey of becoming not only Marc Lainhart, but the Intuitive Prospector, in search of my own spiritual gold through a lot of hard work and a lot of transformations. Just like a prospector goes out to find that piece of gold, got to have the right attitude, the right equipment, put in the hard work, dig down and deep down in that dirt, finding that stone that contains that gold. And when you find what you're looking for, it's worth the effort. But it's going to take some effort. You get out what you put in. And so the awakened man looks like this. Doesn't fear vulnerability, actually embraces vulnerability, lives in his heart, comes from a place of connecting himself through his heart to his external environment. The awakened man embraces his feelings. Boy, that was a big one for me, because I was not raised to embrace my feelings, because it was such a vulnerability. Communicates clearly, getting to the point and doing it with words that are kind, caring, and compassionate, because your words do matter, you guys. There is a vibration that is carried with that. And so tone and inflection in your words do matter, because your thoughts become your words. So if you're really clear about what your thoughts are, and your thoughts are positive, that's for the exercise that I did earlier on about having my 110-year-old self come back and talk to my current self. The one thing that kept coming back for me was positive thoughts, positive living. The awakened man seeks to understand himself and others, knowing that you have a perception, but you sit at a round table of life, and that there are many people with many different beliefs, cultures, perspectives, ideas. But it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that they're sitting in a different position of the table, but it's still the same table of life. The awakened man honors both the feminine energy and the masculine energies within him. And I talked about that in part one, what the masculine energy looks like and what the feminine energy looks like, and both of those expectations or intentions that come from the divine masculine and the divine feminine. The awakened man takes responsibility for his actions. And for me, just sharing today's journey, I forgot to tell you about today's positive mantra, or our positive affirmation for the month. And for me, it's always been believe it, see it, achieve it. Instead of seeing it first, I've always, I switched during this spiritual transformation of believing in my heart. Some would call that faith. Some would call that a sense of knowing or claircognizance, a sense of knowing within your heart that that's the right path. Even if everybody's telling you, oh, don't do that, Mark, people are going to judge you and have your opinion. You're going to lose friends. You may lose family based on being a psychic or a medium. And following that God spark, following that path, believe it, then you start to see it. That's when the unfoldment starts to happen, that attunement, if you will, and you start to see that seed plant its roots, and then you start to see the roots grow through patience and trust and development, and those roots start to garner fruits. And for me, that's this month's positive affirmation, personally as a testimonial, to believe it, to see it, to achieve it. And with that, I'm going to talk about some tips for awakening, and I'm also going to talk about the ego versus the soul, what the ego wants versus what the soul wants. And just want to say thank you for listening to my story today. I had to really think about what I wanted to say in this two-part series of The Awakened Man, how much I wanted to share and put yourself out there. And that just brings me right back to that bucket of The Awakened Man, that I don't fear vulnerability anymore. And before, I would have never shared this story with anybody except maybe my counselor. And now I'm broadcasting it all around the world. So talk about vulnerability. That's a strength, not a weakness. And one of the things that I teach, for whether you're a student of mine or I'm mentoring you, or if you're in my spiritual development group online, I always remind them a few things. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's how you learn, and that's where the transformation process begins. I also remind them that if there's no pressure, there's no diamond. And, the fear of failure, those two words go hand in hand. And for me, when I started to get into positive thinking, get into positive living, I flip script now on fear. For me, fear is false evidence appearing real. And we see a lot of fear out there in the world, guys. When you live externally like what I was doing before I took my Myers-Briggs profile, before I learned that I was the Inspire, before I learned I was the Intuitive Prospector, I really came from a place of fear. And I can tell you that there are three types of fear in real life, from being a lifesaver, going into burning buildings, being on sinking boats, saving a life. The three types of fear are, you're going to do three things when it really happens in the moment. You're going to fight, flight, or freeze. That's real fear-based energy. Anything outside of that is a construct of consciousness in our mind. For example, if I'm out on a hike and I'm enjoying the beautiful hike, and all of a sudden my mind gets in the way and goes down this spiral of, well, what if there's a bear around this corner? Or what if this tree falls on me? Or what if the lightning strikes? Because lightning strikes are very profound in the mountains when you're hiking. You can lose the magic of the moment, and that's one of the tips I'm going to be giving you here in just after our second break, about tips for your awakening to help you. But when you live in a fear-based energy, again, just remind yourself that it's false evidence appearing real, and really explore and discover and prospect to see if that's really something that you need to be fearful of, or is it just the cave that you didn't understand that led you to the fear-based energy, and it's that cave-re fear that usually holds the treasure we seek. And there's a lot of truth to that. And the other word is failure, and I teach this in my online development group all the time. Failure, again, is perceived as a weakness, and I don't look at that anymore. I look at as failure as first attempt in learning, because one of the greatest gifts that we're given here in the physical human condition, the human experience, is to learn, because it's from the learning that you grow and you become the seedling to the majestic oak tree. And so, again, fear, false evidence appearing real, and failure, first attempt in learning. And so I always tell my students in my group, don't come from a place of fear, and fail often and fail big. And for those of you listening, some of you may know the term carpe diem. Carpe diem the crap out of today is what I say, because there are no guarantees for tomorrow. So, again, just a couple things to think about. The awakened man, do you fall into the awakened man, or do you fall into the wounded man bucket? The ego versus the soul, just a couple things to think about before we get into our second break, is the ego seeks to serve itself. Boy, isn't that true. I did that from the first half of my life. The soul seeks to serve others. And I found that serving others by paying it forward, by giving, whether it's community, whether it's for the planet, whether it's for a colleague or a coworker or a friend, the soul seeks to serve. And you find, in this day and age, there's a lot of people that are self-serving and not serving their soul. So the ego seeks outward recognition. Oh boy, I lived there for many, many years, seeking that next award, seeking that next bonus, where the soul seeks inner authenticity. And I always say, live authentic, find your authentic self. And it's not going to happen overnight, guys. The two of the pillars I teach on, trust and patience. Trust how you're feeling. Trust what you're picking up in your intuition. Your intuition is your language of your soul. And the ego doesn't want to have that. The ego is going to have you outward looking for the feedback. And we see that through social media right now about how many likes you can get, how many hearts you can get on your Instagram post or your Twitter feed or your Facebook post. And I even, when I started, I got caught up in that. The ego sees life as a competition. I always remind people the only person you should ever be in competition with yourself is with yourself. Nobody else. You're trying to be the best that you can be. Where the soul sees life as a gift. That's why we call it the present. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, today's the gift. That's why we call it the present. Ego seeks to preserve self. Boy, it does. And you're going to, not to be naive, that you have to have a little bit of ego in this world to survive. It is a very fast, chaotic, violent place at times. We have a history within our world of being violent. But that doesn't mean that you have to get caught up in it. It doesn't mean that you have to seek to preserve just yourself. The soul actually seeks to preserve others, and that there's a lot of truth in that. The ego looks outward. The soul looks inward. The ego feels lack. The soul feels abundance. The ego is mortal. The soul is eternal. Let me say that one again. The ego is mortal. The soul is eternal. That's because we're here to learn, guys. We're here to grow, transform, learn. Ego is drawn to lust. The soul is drawn to love. Ego seeks wisdom. The soul is wisdom. Ego enjoys the prize. Soul enjoys the journey. Ego is cause to pain. Soul is cause of healing. Ego rejects God, whether you're an atheist or an agnostic or a believer. The soul embraces whatever God is for you. Ego seeks to be filled. Soul is eternal wholeness. Ego is me. Soul is re. And again, that's just a little bit of the ego versus the soul. We're going to be going to our second break. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me today. We'll be back here in 2 minutes when I bring back some spiritual tips for your awakening. This is Inspired Living Radio with Marc and Kim here on OMTimes Radio.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Have you wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
One planet, 7.3 billion people, only one you. Life offers us many opportunities and learning experiences. Are you ready to explore and discover this beautiful planet, the life and energy all around us, the spiritual world, and what is unseen, along with your own personal soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, is the spiritual connection you have been prospecting for. Internationally known as a tested and professional clairvoyant medium and spiritual advisor, Marc's work as a metaphysical teacher, medical instructor, radio show host, inspirational writer, and hiking guide, are here to help you on a journey of self-discovery, healing, inspiration, education, and a whole lot of spiritual awesomeness. Dare to dream. Dare to explore. Dare to live. For more information on Marc's spiritual practice in Seattle, Washington, please visit marclainhart.com or internet search The Intuitive Prospector.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Opiates has taken everything and everyone I've ever loved away from me. Everything.
I blew my ankle out and I got prescribed pain pills by my doctor.
If making my detox public is going to help somebody, I'm all for it. I just wish I would have had a warning.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth. A message from Truth, the Ad Council, and ONDCP.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to Inspired Living Radio. We are at the epic finale of this episode where I'm going to give you some tips for awakening. Again, you can get these tips through the Alexa or Echo Pod. Just ask to open up Positive Living, and you may actually hear my voice come through with some of the tips I'm going to give you right now for your awakening process. We've been talking the last few weeks about the awakened man, what that looks like, part one. So if you haven't caught that part one episode, make sure to go to marclainhart.com, click on my YouTube channel, and subscribe so you can get all of those videos and podcasts that I'm doing with my Soul Adventures library. I always like to say spiritual awesomeness. But as far as tips for awakening, I always say the first thing that really is helpful is to get your butt outside. There's healing energy, spirit, and magic in the great outdoors. I always remind people that nature is our greatest teacher, our greatest engineer, our greatest healer, and nature always seems to get it done in its own timeline, doesn't it? But here as humans, we always want to, get it done on demand. I want it right now. Can I have it now? But most of us don't take the time to disconnect so that we may make the time to reconnect to our first home and our greatest teacher, nature. So that's tip number one, tips for the awakening that will help with your journey, whether you're struggling with addiction, whether you're struggling with depression, whether you're struggling with anxiety. And I also say pay attention to your external environments. We just went through a very powerful full moon cycle, a full moon that's talking about releasing things. We're also currently in Mercury retrograde. I say pay attention to those external cycles because they really do have an influence on your energy, your vibration, your emotions, your feelings. And, of course, the mantra for this show was believe it, see it, achieve it. You do matter. The truth that we must all reconcile in that we are an integral part of the living, breathing, and symbiotic and complex system we call Earth. By being part of such a system, each and every thought, word, and action we take has a positive or negative infinite impact on our world. Like I said, many want to see it before they believe it, but I'll challenge you today to go within and listen to the God spark in your heart, the intuition of your soul, that soul energy of believing it, and then you start to see it, and before you know it, you're going to achieve it. Focus more on others, what I call selfless. The biggest mistake we see in people in their journey is when folks are trying to awaken their purpose by focusing only on themselves. And again, I said earlier in the show that the only way out is in, but don't lose focus of becoming so involved in focusing on yourself that you forget about your friends and family, your animals, the world around you, your coworkers. Don't forget about even just strangers, the strangers that are around you, because that's what selfless is all about. Focus more on others. That's part of the focusing of going within. I like to say an attitude for gratitude, or what I wake up every single day, especially after this last week of dealing with dizzy spells and vertigo, is having a attitude for gratitude. My grateful eight things that I'm grateful for each and every day. If you're having a rough go, think for a second, take a nice deep breath. Move into the magic of the moment and think about the things that you have right now that you're grateful for. Clean drinking water, roof over your head, people who love you, things that you take for granted. And it really does help. It shifts your mindset. It shifts your attitude. And when you have an attitude for gratitude, it helps you to focus in on others. They've done research over the past 3 decades that found that gratitude and focusing on others is not just pleasant in a passive emotion, but rather an activating, energizing force that may lead you to pursue your goals, become well through self-improvement, more socially engaged and positive with a sense of purpose and passion. Focus more on others. Another one that I like to do is try something new every single day. Again, I said earlier, don't get caught up in that fear energy, false evidence appearing real, and don't worry about failure. That's a first attempt in learning. I call this soul adventures. Try something new every single day. What path are you on the many roads of life? Is it just that 9-to-5 treadmill? Are you just meant to wake up, work, and then die? God, I hope not. Many times we get stuck in a routine, mundane, status quo that we quickly overlook the opportunities, experiences, and ventures that wait all of us. Our lives to awaken on a daily basis and find the magic in the moment. Remember that word life. Life is an acronym. Learn it from experience. So don't become that creature of habit. Awaken to your journey right now. And like I always say, carpe diem the crap out of today. This is a big one. Your health is your true wealth. Nothing else matters without your wealth. I've learned this personally from watching others from MS, from cancer, from several types of cancer, actually. My real father passed away from throat cancer, my father-in-law from MS, my brother from brain cancer. Gosh, there's a couple others that, that people just, they lose their health. And even it was a reminder for me this week as I battled a scare with vertigo where I couldn't walk and I was getting sick and my wife had to take care of me. And that was just a reminder that your health is your true wealth. So getting good rest, staying hydrated, eating healthy, meditating. I do Qigong, getting out of nature. These are all tips to help you with the awakening process. And it's part of the awakened man journey as well, is to take care of yourself, but also take care of the world and take care of your community and those around you. I always like to say, embrace, expand, evolve the mindset. The human mind, or what I call the supercomputer, because it does live in between two temples, if you think about it from a anatomy standpoint. The human experience is full of incredible ideas. I always say things are born twice, first in your mind and what actions you take to bring out into your reality. What consciousness are you tapping into? Some of you may not even be tapping into any kind of higher self-consciousness by meditating or just going about your day and being on that 9-to-5 treadmill and just working a job, paying your bills, and then dying. I hope that I can challenge you and inspire you today and motivate you to embrace, expand, and evolve the mindset, because there's a lot of consciousness. There's a lot of great ideas out there. Just take a second, look around you. Everything that you're surrounded by is somebody else's idea brought into your reality. And many times during our journey, we get stuck in certain ways of thinking, acting, and responding to the many experiences on the many roads of life. And sometimes, guys, that life just kicks you in the gut. The only thing consistent I found in this journey that is consistent with life is change. So do you want to be above the waves of change, or do you want to find yourself underneath the waves of change being crushed? I always say be a big wave surfer, be a big kahuna, get on that surfboard and get on those waves of change. When we become a lifelong learner and a student of life, we can embrace and expand our experiences and trying new things. Neuroplasticity, rewiring of the brain, looking at new perspectives. I think of Dr. Wayne Dyer when he reminds us that when we change the way we look at things, the things that we look at start to change. And Eckhart Tolle, another great mind, reminds us that awareness is the greatest agent for change. So if you're stuck and you want to change things up, embrace who you are, embrace where you're at, because you're right where you need to be, but also expand and evolve the mindset. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Boy, I learned that for the first half of my life, and no more insanity, no more chaos. And if we engage with our senses of breathing, seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, hearing with our external environment, an awakening occurs when we have learned and experienced something new. They've shown several studies when you embrace your senses and you try something new and you overcome fear or you overcome failure or you discover the cave that you've been fearing this whole time actually does hold the treasure you seek, they show that the brain is rewired through neuroplasticity, and certain chemicals are released in the brains, endorphins. There's a whole chemical reaction that takes place. And the only reason I'm sharing this with you guys because I learned a lot about the brain through my brother's journey of brain cancer. He did brain mapping. It was something hard to see because he looked like something out of a Star Trek movie, like something from the Borg for all you Star Trek fans, because he had wires coming out of his head. And that was hard to see, but at the same time, we got to learn a lot. And he was one of the first patients here in Seattle, Washington, to do the brain mapping and volunteer his mind and his journey so that others could learn and expand and evolve with the concepts of how the brain really works. Again, your supercomputer that lives between your temples. The other one I like to recommend is what I call COPS. COPS. And I don't mean the police officers out there, because COPS is also citizen on patrol, but the actual clear out, prioritize, and simplify. Start by making room. They always show when you create a vacuum, something's going to fill that. So you need to clear your space of the stuff that you no longer need, whether that's the mind, whether that's the thoughts that are going through your mind. Do you need the same thought over and over again, or is it time to expand, evolve, and clear out by not making room for that thought and telling yourself, you know what? I'm not going to pay attention to that thought. Move it along. What's my next thought? We find that the stuff merely serves as a distraction from your life when you're caught up in that process. So make room by clearing out and simplifying. And while, yes, decluttering your physical space is important, it's also important to declutter your mind. Take time every day to sit in silence and solitude. Again, the words listen and silent is an anagram. You switch the letters around, they have the same letters but two different meanings. I always remind people, when you sit still, the journey unfolds. Rumi reminds us, the more silent and still you become, the more you actually hear. And that's always been the one that's really fascinated me with, what do you mean if I sit still and if I'm silent that I'm going to actually hear? Give it a go. See what unfolds for you. Allow your thoughts to pass without judgment and slowly watch your mind clear of mental clutter. I always call this self-sabotage. Don't self-sabotage yourself. I find that meditation, and there are many forms of meditation, walking the dog, doing the garden, planting a tree, exercise, sitting in silence, sitting in stillness, allows you to relax into what is presently true. And what is always present for all of us is that there is only love, no fear, and offers you a greater connection to your intuition. And again, the intuition is the language of the soul. So if you're not doing a daily meditation practice, I highly recommend it because it is going to help you in so many different ways. And last but not least, one of the tips for your awakening, the awakened man, woman, child, is to the old adage of hold on and get dragged or let go and be free. And this is going back to that discussion I talked about, the awakened man on the ego versus the soul. And in the reality is you can't force a spiritual awakening. I didn't ask for a spiritual awakening. I wasn't forced to have a spiritual awakening. Your free will and your choice will come into play. But anyone can have one. Anyone can have a spiritual awakening. Whether it's a shaking that's caused the awakening, whether it's trauma, whether it's just you're tired of where your journey is at, you want something new, something better. But the following tips, like the ones that I've been talking to you about, can help you, but there's no prescription for enlightenment. Again, let me say that. There is no prescription for enlightenment. And I found in my journey the way we get to enlightenment is through education. Education leads us to knowledge. Knowledge leads us to wisdom. Wisdom hopefully leads us to enlightenment. Do what you can and then let it go. I always come back to the 4 agreements. That's one of the things I always refer people to is the 4 agreements. Do what you say you're going to do. Do your best at what you're doing. Don't take things personally, and don't make assumptions, because when you go that assumption route, that spiral downward, it's just going to take you to places that don't serve your higher self. If you get attached to an idea of having a spiritual awakening and attached to your idea of what a spiritual awakening looks like, I'm here to tell you today, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because there's going to be so many different angles and so many different things that come across your path, whether it's people, places, or things. Because there is, like I said, there is no prescription for enlightenment. And you're far less likely to experience one if you have this perspective or this expectation of what a spiritual awakening looks like. I always remind my clients when they come to have a reading with me that your expectations will usually lead you to self-disappointment. So be mindful of that if you expect a spiritual awakening, it may never actually happen because you're expecting it to happen. Know that you are on the perfect path for you. And keep in mind that the spiritual awakening is not necessarily a one-time thing. The spiritual path is a lifelong journey of growth, unfoldment, transformation. The seed doesn't become the tree without the transformation. The caterpillar doesn't become the butterfly without the cocoon phase. The diamond, or I should say the charcoal, doesn't become the diamond without applied pressure. And continue to follow, these steps that I was listing out, for the spiritual awakening, tips to raise your consciousness, and, start taking responsibility for some of the things that you're doing in life. Stop pretending your problems don't exist. Face them. The longer you ignore them, the stronger they will get. Stop putting your happiness of life satisfactions in the hands of others. Take control. Become the captain of your own ship. And carpe diem the crap out of today. Stop pretending your mistakes never happened. Embrace them. Learn from them. Grow from them. They made you who you are. Stop telling yourself you can't do something before you've given it an honest effort. Take a leap of faith. Embrace that fear. Embrace that failure. And again, your mind's going to be rewired to do amazing things. And stop neglecting the things that are important to you. I just want to say thank you so much for listening to today's show on The Awakened Man. I hope that some of these gold nuggets that we went prospecting for today resonates with you. Marinate on those, percolate on those. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out. Visit my website at marclainhart.com. Kim will be back next week. You can visit her at lovefirst.info. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great rest of your week. Believe it, see it, achieve it, and carpe diem the crap out of today. Until our next soul adventure together, be kind, be caring, be compassionate. Namaste.